Welcome to another episode of the Piper podcast, How I Grew My Brand. So, what makes a successful business then? Where do the brilliant ideas come from? And how do they attain the status of brand legend? I'm Mary Nightingale, and with me today are husband and wife team Anjum Anand and Adarsh Sethia, co-founders of the Spice Tailor, the brand behind easy-to-use Indian meal kits that enable us all to make authentic restaurant-quality dishes at home quickly and conveniently. Anjum and Adarsh, welcome.
Hello, Mary.
Hi, Mary.
Hi. So, is that a satisfactory description then of the Spice Tailor?
Yes. I think it is what we did, but I think what you miss in a one-line sort of description is all the passion, at least from my side, because as the food person, that kind of goes into creating a brand.
It was a journey of passion. For her, it was all about the food. And it was about the authenticity. It was about the convenience of making it at home. It expanded beyond Indian food. And we went into Southeast Asian sauces and kits and stuff like that towards the end. But I think it was a good summary.
All right, so we're going to talk about the Spice Tailor journey and how that came and reached a conclusion in some ways. And we're going to talk about your new business as well. But first, let's talk about Spice Tailor. Explain the range of products. It's all curries, is it?
Well, it started out as all curries. So because that is what sort of on the supermarket shelves when we started. To me, it wasn't really authentic Indian food, and I knew we could do better. But then as the curries became successful, I felt like actually there is room for more. So part of an Indian meal is always like the lentils. And a lot of vegetarians, especially in India, but also abroad, they look for lentils. You don't have a lot on the market, good lentils, good beans. And then it just kept growing from there. So what else would people look for from Indian food? And it just sort of grew and grew. I think the curries were always the heart and soul of it, as they are in India.
Yeah. And how did the idea come about? You spotted a gap in the market, did you?
Yeah, so it's that really typical Indian story where you live at home, your mum cooks really good Indian food, and you go to university, and then you don't have your mum cooking, and you head to the supermarket to pick up something just to fill that fix of wanting an Indian meal, and then you taste it, and it's not what I would consider Indian food, and it also wasn't harmonious, so it was not right on two levels. So,
what do you mean by that?
What I mean is that Indian food is like layers of flavors. You start with one and it kind of goes to the other and the next and the next. And it just is this wonderful mouthful. And that's the reason we love it so much. But in the supermarkets, and it also is because it's sort of jarred, you have to kind of balance the pH and it just ends up not being harmonious or layered. And also things like, balti, and it didn't really exist in India. So I wanted to do it properly. But then I went into writing cookbooks. So that was the beginning of oh my God, I need to teach everyone what real Indian food is because they're going to love it so much more. And then I went into writing cookbooks and did some TV. And I found people coming up to me in the street saying, I had this really great Goan dish, but where can I find it here? Or I had a really great Kerala dish. And I thought, we're ready. We're ready to do proper regional Indian food. And so went back to the supermarket, realized nothing had changed. And then I said to Adarsh, I really want to do this.
And it chimed, didn't it? I mean, it was very timely because meal kits are on the up.
Yeah.
And I would love someone to explain to me about meal kits. Explain the difference between meal kits and scratch cooking and how it works now in the modern home.
Yeah, so, okay, scratch cooking is scratch cooking. You buy everything, you cook it all up. Then you have sort of the partial cooking where you sort of get a kit which has the sauce and you buy the vegetables or the chicken or whatever with it. That's not what we did. Well, what we did was wanted to make it easy. So when we talked about what did we want to do, I wanted to make sure if you buy the Spice Tailor, you could then choose what to add in it. You might want corn-fed chicken, but you might want sheep chicken. You might want vegetables. You might want whatever you wanted. You could make that to your taste and your budget, but you always end up with a really good meal. So it's a meal kit in terms of it really aids in your cooking.
And what do you actually get in a kit?
So you get the spices separately, because in an Indian meal, you cook the spices separately, and that starts adding those layers of flavors we were talking about earlier. And then you sort of get a marinade if you wanted to marinate your chicken or lamb. and then you have the main sauce. So you have the 3-step process, which I think I want to say we kind of started, but
I'm not aware of anyone else doing it before us.
But it really wasn't to be clever. It was just about how do we get the best food on that plate, but not reinvent the wheel.
And make it conveniently, because the one thing I do know about Indian food is it's very complicated. It can take hours and hours and hours to make.
Yeah, exactly. But it's, the frying of the onions and the frying of the ginger and the garlic and then the tomatoes. But to get it all right so nothing's burnt, it's not the easiest food to make. So all the time and the effort of doing all of that and the ingredients you need, we took care of it. So you could just take it and say, you know what, today I fancy spicy goan or a chicken tikka masala. And we wanted to make it easy. When we wanted to actually make it like a 10-minute meal. So all, depending on what you're cooking with it. So again, very midweek friendly.
But it's a crowded marketplace, isn't it? Meal kits, if you go to the supermarket, there's a lot of meal kits.
Every aisle in the supermarket is crowded. Does it mean that it's being done properly? Does it mean that it's meeting consumer needs? I think there's a lot of white space in the supermarket. The challenge is, how do you get a product that elevates the experience you're getting in the supermarket at the moment, but at an affordable price, so that it's a good value proposition for consumers?
Yeah. Also, we never really looked in the supermarket. We were not clever enough to go and say, what is everyone else doing? What do we do? It was very much, I think people like these flavors and I want to do it so that actually they feel like they're eating restaurant food. So we really aligned ourselves to restaurant flavors, to getting it right so that you can actually cook your chicken tikka masala and say, you know what, this was cheaper, better and tastier than my average curry house or even a really good curry house down the road. And so actually we just always sort of looked at what we want people to eat, what people do want from Indian food and sort of tried to get that.
That's really important. We went about getting the product right, or Anjum went about getting the product right. And so we got something which, when we went and did some quantitative analysis and we sent it out to lots of people, etc., we said, okay, this is the product. How does it compare to your favourite takeaway or to your favourite restaurant experience? It wasn't how does it compare to what's in the supermarket. And so when people came back and said, 96% of people said it's as good as or better than my favourite meal in a restaurant, we said, okay, we've got the product. And then the second side of it was, well, if this is the product, this is what it's going to cost. And then this is what it's going to have to retail for in the supermarket. And at the time when we launched, we were about £3 for a packet. The average price point achieved by everything else on the shelves was £1.25. And so there's this big gap. Some of the buyers that we spoke to said, everyone's at this price, they're not going to pay that. But actually that's not the case. People just want good quality food. And so is it a crowded market? Is it not a crowded market? I'd say in terms of quality, it wasn't a crowded market when we went in.
Okay, can we go back?
Yeah.
Right back to the beginning. I'd like to talk about early lives, families, how you met. So what's the story of you two?
So I think our families knew each other. So Adarsh has a really big family. So in terms of he's got lots of cousins in London, we don't. But it turns out that I was friends with his cousins, my sister was friends with his cousins, and my brother was friends with other cousins, but we never really met. And then it's a bit Bollywood.
I'm loving it so far.
His cousin, who was a very close friend of mine, got married in India, and she said, all my girlfriends need to be there the whole time, and you're all coming early. So we all sort of went, and Adarsh, being her cousin, was part of like organising. And I guess that's when we met.
You were born in London, but then you moved to Geneva, is that right?
Yeah, so my parents moved the whole family to Geneva. I was 4. So I spent 4 to 14 in Switzerland, which was a really fabulous experience because it was very multicultural, because a lot of people moved to Geneva because they have the UN, they have the WHO. So our school I went to the American school because they spoke English. And it just meant that you're meeting people from all over. So it was and it's also a really outdoorsy life. There's not so much to do. You wake up and you walk on the lake and you go to the mountains. So I loved it.
And Adarsh, what about you?
I was born in India. I came here when I was 4 and I've lived here ever since. Went to school in London, went to university in London, lived here for the last, majority of my life.
And what about your careers prior to the Spice Tailor? I know that you wrote cookery books and you worked in restaurants and so on. And what about you, Adarsh? Where did you start?
I set up a business with my brother out of university. Then worked in a family environment probably for about 15 years. My father was an entrepreneur, went into his business, etc. Did that with the family for about 15 years. And then I went into setting up. I said, okay, family businesses are great, but they can be a bit irrational. And I had enough of that. And so we set up an IT services company. Then we set up the Spice Tailor together.
So you're from a family of entrepreneurs?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, same. My father came from India with like £1.50 in his pocket. I think he was like 19 and he was born in 1935, so you can do the maths. And he came with a job. And he clearly was a natural entrepreneur, because I hear his stories of trying to get a business going and the perseverance in starting. And then, so from when I remember onwards, he had his own business. And it's funny because I grew up wanting to do business. So I went and did a business degree. And then when I started doing business, I just thought, oh my God, this is so... Because I went to work with him in a department and I thought, this is the most stressful thing I've ever done. I don't want to do it.
What, working with your father or just...
But the whole thing, because he's an Indian dad. So he's like, honey, go make some coffee. And I'm like, I didn't do 4 years of a degree to come make coffee. Let's be clear. So there was a bit of that. But also it was, it's a lot of juggling in business. And I guess when you come out of university, you're not capable of handling all the juggling.
Well, you're not experienced, are you?
You have no experience. And I think I was thrown in the deep end and I really was very stressed by it. And I would go home after my day of work and I would cook. And I would say to my mum, I really want to learn your recipes, because actually, even though we're Indian, my mum said to me, you don't need to be in the kitchen. You should go and be whatever you want to be, because generations, all Indian women have been in the kitchen and you have the opportunity of doing what you want to do. So get an education, go and work. So she never was not the kind of Indian mum who said, no, come and cook dinner. She was like, go, you do you. I will sort out the dinner. So, but I would come home and I said, I want to learn your recipes. I will have kids hopefully one day and I want to pass this down to them. I'm second generation Indian. They will be third generation. And these traditions and foods and everything is quite important to me, the culture. So I started cooking, and the more I cooked, the more I loved it. I was like, this is very peaceful and this is enjoyable. And then the whole supermarket thing, where I realized actually I think people would enjoy really Indian food more than what was in the supermarkets. And then that became sort of the passion that took me down the food route. And I actually remember coming home one day and saying to my parents, I think I want to cook. And my mum was like, you've done 4 years of a business degree and you want to get back in the kitchen when all I wanted you to do is get out of the kitchen. So it was a bit of a disappointment, but it worked out in the end.
And some people say, oh, she's the Indian Nigella.
Yeah, yes, that happened a lot.
And how did that feel? And how did that come about, first of all?
It was the first radio interview I did when I walked in, and you can't really see me. And I think the lady who was doing the interview was like, well, you cannot see her, but she looks like the Indian Nigella. And that stuck. I mean, it's just an easy tagline, really. And I don't think it was ever really true, is the truth, because Nigella and our styles are so different.
It's not a bad tagline,
and it's not a bad tagline, exactly. And it became the tagline.
So explain the timeline, then, of the Spice Tailor. When did you launch? How did it grow? What was the journey of that?
So I'll start and then you can move on.
Yeah.
So the journey was, I decided I wanted to do the brand, and I kept saying to Adarsh, I want to do this brand. And he's like, well, do it. And I said, well, I can't, because I've got 2 kids or 1 child, but I would like another. I've got my books. I've got my TV. It's very full on writing a book, because I do all my own cooking. I didn't hire anyone. And then you write the recipes, and then you publish the book, and then you do all the stuff that comes after publishing a book. So it doesn't really end. So I kept saying I need a business partner. It must have been like a year and a half of going for walks saying, I really think you should be my business partner, when he finally said, because he said, I don't see myself doing Indian food. And I was like, no, we can do it. So then I finally got Adarsh involved, and then we started in earnest in 2010. So I think my first cookbook came out in 2005. So that gives you an idea of sort of the timeline. So within 5 years of my first cookbook, the BBC series came out in 2008. 2010, we finally got started, and we were in supermarkets 2011.
You were quite a tough one to talk round. You didn't want to do this to begin with. Was it because you didn't want to work together, or was it you just didn't like the idea?
It was a little bit of everything. I mean, I'm not a great cook. Anjum would tell you I'm not a cook.
No, you are not a cook.
I'm not a cook, as I said.
At
She'll
all.
tell you.
But that's okay.
No, it's fine.
Someone has to wash the dishes. And I have to tell you, I'm bloody good at that. But so I'm not a cook. Indian food, therefore, I eat a lot of it. It's critical for me to eat it. X number of times a week. If we go on holiday and I haven't eaten Indian food for 4 days, I'm driving around trying to find the nearest Indian restaurant in.
You get spice withdrawal symptoms,
I really do. But I can tell you all the cities we've been driving around on holiday trying to find somewhere to get an Indian meal. So I get all that, but I don't understand Indian food because I don't cook. And at that time I was doing my IT services business, doing a few other things on the side, etc. She said, let's go and do this. I'm like, I'm busy doing what I'm doing. And so finally she said, we should do it. I said, okay, fine, we'll do it.
Well, he said, fine, okay, I'll help you get started. I think that was his concession. He didn't say, he said, I will help.
Did you think it was going to be successful?
Not like this, no. But the thing about food and beverage as against IT services is it's real. It's got a little bit of everything. And it's really the most enjoyable journey. So we started on this journey. We got into Waitrose, and that was in 2011. And I don't think the others started to happen until 2014. And you'd go there, and we had a meeting with one buyer. And it was very interesting. So Anjum and I would go in, very different roles. So she's the food person. She'd talk about the sauces and the kits, why they're different, what dishes they make, how versatile they are, etc., etc. And they look at me for commercials. So we had two very different experiences in the supermarket. I think that went really well. I think they love the food. They love this. I said, the guy was arguing about me with the margin all the way through the meal. Yeah. And she totally missed it. And but the meeting we had with one of the buyers who said, no, the price, going back to one of our earlier conversations, the price point's wrong. Everyone else is at €1.25, you're at £3. Price point is wrong. This needs to be $2.25. A sauce is a sauce is a sauce. At which point Anjum sort of took offence.
I know. I said, no, you're wrong. I'm sorry. And you don't say that to a buyer, but really it was insulting to the entire range and everything I believe to be good Indian food. So I was like, I'm sorry, you're wrong. But an organic sauce is different to another sauce, and a sauce where all your ingredients are real and fresh and cooked properly, as opposed to a sauce which might have, just everything thrown in a drum, which used to happen a lot, like a kettle drum to cook, and a lot of fillers. It's not the same thing. And really, we were more expensive, but it wasn't because we wanted to be. It was because that's how much it cost us, because everything was fresh. Yes, so I felt like I thought we wouldn't get that listing. I thought we'd walked out and I'd insulted the buyer. Not that I'd meant to. But I think that became a bit of a role for us, where I really championed the food and wouldn't really have anyone say anything very negative about it because I probably knew a little bit more. And I think that was one of our strengths. I really do know Indian food. I really have spent my entire life eating it, my entire adult career cooking and learning more about it. So I feel like you never stop learning with food. Once you know one thing, you learn something else. And the buyers knew all about kind of selling in supermarkets, but they couldn't argue about the food. I could get it wrong. I might push a product which I think is great and it doesn't connect with this consumer. So there became that role where I kind of talked the food, and others should never talk about food because he gets it wrong. And I never talked about the financial sides and the margins because, I wouldn't get it right. So we then ended up quite early on having very defined roles, which were quite complementary. I think in that sense we were quite lucky.
Very complementary. Yeah.
It's brilliant. And I think it's interesting, isn't it, when you look at any partnership, but particularly husband and wife partnerships, where it doesn't always work. It can be too close, or it can be a little bit blurred, as in people don't have their roles properly defined. But you two, I don't want to make any assumptions about it. It looks perfect.
In terms of our skill set, what we were bringing to it, it was really ideal. But that doesn't make it an easy journey.
No.
There's lots of sort of don't talk to me after 8 p.m, from my side at least, about the last
Anything.
email. Yeah, exactly. Did you answer the email? I don't want to know. I'm in bed reading a book. It's not a family business because it's just the two of us. But, the kids had to hear about it at meal times. And it's when you have your own business, it's very intense. And it does take over your life. It is tough. On the other hand, if you get it right, you totally trust your partner. So I think there is a trust and an understanding that is really very powerful in a partnership when you're husband and wife.
And it makes the journey so much easier. Setting up a business is really challenging. It's all-encompassing. The chances of success are slim. You've got issues going on every single day. Stuff that you could imagine, stuff that you couldn't imagine. Things would be happening all the time. But if you have someone who you're properly partnering with, and who understands, it makes things a lot easier. Once we got sort of escape velocity and we had a business, we got into more supermarkets, etc. She was focusing more on the stuff that she liked, and I was focusing more on the stuff that I could add value in. It became more enjoyable.
I'm going to ask you about Piper's 1770 theory, which I think you'll be aware of. It's the idea that brands go through inflection points at around these stages. As they scale, perhaps, I don't know, in terms of turnover or number of sites or employees. I want to ask, does that make sense to you? And can you relate the growth of Spice Tailor to that 1770 experience?
Yeah, it does. Our revenue was at 17. And we were coming out of COVID. And it would just require us to re-engineer the business. It was a proper inflection point. And so when we got to 17, and we were like, okay, fine, now what does the next step look like? And of course, as you get bigger, the incremental 25% means more than it did when you were at 5 million.
Sure.
And so the conversations were becoming, more and more complicated, because we're saying not just that you need to have an extra couple of containers for us, but you need another 10 containers next year for us. And then it becomes machinery and stuff like that.
How did you grow in terms of workforce?
There were two parts to our business. We had people on the ground in the UK that we worked with, and then because so much of our business was in India, around the quality control and the supply chain, we had people in India that we worked with.
So where were the sauces and the marinades made? Is it the ingredients that came from India, or was it actually made in India?
Yeah, it was all made in India. We took that decision really early on that if you want the best Indian food, you need to get the freshest Indian ingredients. So tomatoes in the UK are not going to taste like the tomatoes in India, to keep it just really basic, or spices. So the one thing when we talked about it is it should be made in India.
Because it was always about the product.
Yeah.
And so the decision was it has to be made there. But then it adds huge degrees of complexity to your supply chain. Supermarkets they'll place an order today for delivery tomorrow. But it's taking you 6 weeks to get it from India. It's taking you 4 weeks to get it made over there. You've got to tell them 4 weeks in advance what you want to get made. And so you've got a supply chain that's 14 weeks long. And you've got to continually deliver on the next day to the supermarkets. So it was all made in India. Well, it takes a lot of work.
But so everything was made in India, and then anyone who's seen your kits will know they're in little pouches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they come then complete in the pouches, and they're then transported to the UK. They don't have to be chilled all the way, or
No.
they just exist as they do. But you were subcontracting the manufacturing there. Did you ever consider taking over the whole of the manufacturing process yourselves?
Yeah, we did. We worked with a factory, actually, who wanted to sell. And we thought, okay, we now have enough experience, because our people are always in the factory when they're producing our own batches, and they tasted every batch before it was kind of put into packages. That was sort of our way of saying we know the quality we're getting is always going to be there.
8,000 batches a year.
So we thought we did have some experience, and we tried our hand at it. But it's very tough. It's a whole different business model to run a factory, and it is remote because it is in India. And I think whilst I feel like it was going well, we had issues with the guy whose factory it was, and it didn't work out for us, and we walked away. And I think that was the right move for us, honestly. And we're not a big company. So you asked us how many people we were. It was just us, the two of us, for many years, with a PA who is still with us, and a consultant. And that was it, And our meetings were in common places where we knew that it would be quiet, or our flat. But because Adarsh had this business in India, we were borrowing. We were like, oh, can so-and-so do this? And so we were managing to build this business without a lot of people.
Alongside your existing business?
Okay. Yeah. So it was sort of like, oh, can we use them for helping, get sort out forms for the customers? I don't know. And then we started building up the quality control for food, and building within the setup. But in the UK, we never really went over
A dozen
including
people.
us.
So it was
because
always quite
all the
small.
quality, etc., was on the ground in India.
Yeah, the technology was in India, the quality was in India.
Yeah, and supply chain
Was
primarily in India. So,
yeah.
And quality was the biggest department we had. We had 8 people tasting at the factory when things were being manufactured, bringing it back in, calibrating. If the product wasn't in line with the standard, It was rejected before it even got shipped. And as I mentioned, 8,000 batches a year. So it gives you an idea of how many batches I had to taste every single day. It's a lot of Indian food.
You're listening to the Piper podcast, How I Grew My Brand. We're talking to Anjum Anand and Adarsh Sethia of the Spice Tailor. You sold the company to Premier Foods in 2022. You said the numbers you were at then, you were about 17 million when you did that. Talk to me about the decision to sell, because you could have taken private equity. You could have grown it further yourselves.
Yeah.
How difficult a decision was it, and what was the process that you went through to reach it?
People always said, like, when are you going to sell? And Adarsh was a much more measured response. And I was always like, really depends on how stressed I was in that week. And then I'm ready to sell it. But I think we felt COVID was tough for all businesses. And we saw really successful businesses sort of fold or lose half their value, that we thought you just don't know what's coming around the corner.
And COVID, at least for me, it changed the focus entirely of what I was doing. So from focusing on the marketing side of it, on the sales side of it, which I enjoy, I spent my entire time looking at this 14, which had then become more like 26-week supply chain. So the entire focus of the business changed. The working capital went through the roof, dealing with all of that at that time. I was tired when I came out of COVID, because it spent hours and hours every single day just talking about, did that one container make it or not? Because the supermarkets wanted it on the shelves the next day.
Because the demand was massive, wasn't it? Everyone was cooking.
Absolutely.
But on a really real sense, we are a husband and wife team who've invested 10 years of all of our time and money. And if the Spice Tailor was not successful and it kind of went all the way up and then came all the way down, which does happen to many really good businesses, we sort of would be like, oh, well, now what? And
we just spent 15 years doing what?
Yeah, exactly. And for me, 20, because my entire career was in Indian food. So I think it's a very real sense of, we kind of forget about the realities of actually, if this isn't successful, we start from the beginning. And when you're hitting your 50s and you've spent your entire adult life building something, it's a very serious decision. Like, do we cash out? And then we have something in the bank where we don't have to stress. And by the way, we're still young enough to do something again. We have another go at it. If we waited for another, 5 to 10 years, we'd be 60. And then, I don't know. It kind of felt like for many different reasons, it was perhaps the right time for us.
So you sold to Premier Foods.
Yeah.
44 million, is that correct? Are you able to talk about figures?
Well, it was in the papers, unfortunately. So.
And what's your involvement now, if any?
Mine's a quicker answer, so I'll answer. So I was involved as a consultant for 1 year. They wanted me for 1 year on the food side and teaching them my processes. I went into a few client meetings with them and did the cooking. And then that sort of came to a natural end.
And I still help them on the Indian side of it. So helping them to get to grips with really the most important part of the business, which is making sure the quality of every single batch is correct.
When you look at that 10, 11-year journey, what was tough? What went wrong?
There are always things that go wrong in a business. For us, it was a lot of supply-based issues. But for me, I think it's tough being a working mum, is the truth. And as I was the only food person and packaging and marketing, and not that I was the only marketing, but all the kind of social media, and I was technically the art director, I became a bottleneck because there was only so much I can do. And then once we moved out of Indian and we went into Thai, and then we were going into other, I was spending a lot of time in the kitchen, and they were like, is it ready yet? And I'm like, no, it's not perfect yet. And it was a lot of pressure for me when we've come out with a really good ending. But when I look at it, because you kind of forget some of the bad bits because they came and went. That was sort of the toughest thing for me, was just sort of managing kids in a business.
Our bottleneck, it would have been great if she could do more ranges and everything else. But
you needed one more Anjum, at least.
Well, we needed one more Anjum. We probably needed another 2 supply partners.
And talk to me about the funding.
We had lots and lots and lots and lots of conversations around, do we get external funding? If we got external funding, we could grow faster, we could do this, we could do that, etc. And we dip our toe in the water. And they said, no, we don't want to do this. And we ended up trying to work the stocks, trying to look at our supply chain, speaking to our supply chain partners and And over time saying, look, we've now been doing business for a year and I've been paying you in advance. Could I get 30 days credit, please? And then after 2 years saying, okay, we've now been doing this for 2 years and we're paying you on the nail, etc. We need 60 days credit and we need 90 days credit, etc. So we're getting the suppliers to help us by slowly pushing out in an agreed manner the payment schedule for all the stocks that we needed to have. We then started looking at, okay, well, we've got X number of weeks to cover. Are we doing it correctly? Is our supply chain efficient in how we're doing things, etc.? So we tried to squeeze out working capital from the supply chain. And then we went back to the supermarkets and we said, you know what, you're paying us in 60 days and it doesn't work for us. And because we were growing so rapidly in their category, we were the effective growth of that category. And we said, guys, we've got the supply chain that's 14 weeks long. You're taking 60 days to pay us. Can't do it. And so we need you to change your payment terms. And actually, they were great. They, almost without exception, changed their payment terms. And so the way that we funded the growth of the business was just by looking at how we can run each aspect in a manner that's going to throw out the capital to grow the business to the next year, and then looking at it all over again.
I think we were lucky that when we started, people were getting quite interested in challenger brands. And I think that makes a difference, because if people were not supporting the kind of smaller challenger brand trying to do something different and better, we might not have been so lucky. And it is the thing with business, right? It's a lot of good luck.
A lot of luck.
You can have a good idea, you can create a good product, you can work really hard, but it doesn't guarantee anything. And I think that's where the luck
timing
came
was
in.
right.
Yeah.
The stars were aligned in that regard.
Yeah.
And then when we got going, great product, consumers resonated with it, supermarkets saw that the consumers were resonating with it, they wanted more of it, and so they were very, very helpful. And so we were able to continue this growth at this plus minus 25% every year.
But you know what's interesting, I think, just thinking about it, we both come from backgrounds where our fathers ran their own businesses, and those days you never really got external money.
No.
So if you grow up in a world where actually, you need to work hard, keep going, don't get external money, and also make a profit, that's sort of the values that were in us. And I think we started with that. I think it's very different if you don't see that, because around you, everyone's sort of taking money and funding growth and actually then selling out. And we came from a very different world where the model was different. And I think we hadn't talked about this before, but I think that probably affects just who you are as a business person, because that's what you see. It's a bit old-fashioned, but I think that's where we came from.
We could see a path without external money. Therefore, why take it? It might be easier and we might grow faster.
But you didn't need to.
Well, we were enjoying what we were doing it the way that we were doing it. We had an external board. They kept us in check. We had all that fun, even though we owned the business. And that was a great step. And
at what point did you do that? Because I was going to ask you what changes did you make in terms of your structure along the way, and what was the most impactful? And getting an external board, I'm guessing, would have been a really important step.
It was a really important step, and it was really early on. So we got into Waitrose 2011, and I think we started having an external board in 2014. Very, very early on. And having the external board was incredibly valuable, because these were super experienced people in different areas. We were very careful about how we put the boards together. So one person was an expert in one area and another person was an expert in another area. So we had different viewpoints around the table. And as we're growing the business, the advice that they gave us was very helpful. It helped us avoid some mistakes and helped us accelerate in certain areas.
You need advice. And Adarsh was like, we're going to get board members. And I was like, okay, that's fine. It's all new to me. And I remember at a point, he's like, maybe we need another one. I'm like, no, we don't need more advice. We need more workers on the ground, because you're getting this wonderful advice and there are very few of us to action it. And it's probably easier, cheaper to get in more advice, because, you have a board meeting a month and they'll come to that. But it came to a point where I was like, no, we don't need any more NEDs. What we really need is a marketing director.
And were there hires that you wished you'd made earlier?
Yes, always.
Our first heavy-hitting finance director was probably in 2018 or 19. And we had part-time and a bookkeeper before that, etc. And I wish we'd got a finance director in earlier.
Do you?
He made the world a difference to the business.
And did you finally get your marketing manager that you needed so badly? Who could
He had a
take
huge
care of-
marketing team by the end of it.
Yeah.
Did you? How many on your team?
I mean, it wasn't huge because there were not so many of us, but we had a couple of girls in social media. And we had a marketing director. That was it, really. And then I got a home economist to help me in the kitchen. So that was it.
Well, that must have made an enormous difference.
It did make an enormous difference. And the things I always said to others, I'm just not managing. There's just too much going on. And we're promising this and we're promising that. And we're going into Canada now and da-da-da. And so he's like, well, don't worry. Well, we've got this new marketing director in and they're going to take the pressure off. But actually, it never really stops because you're always growing.
Yeah. In terms of social media and marketing and so on, is there a sort of Spice Tailor community out there? Are there enthusiasts?
Yeah, we were quite lucky. I mean, I don't know what to compare it to be fair, because we only have our own experience. But we did have a little online community. We're very passionate about the product. And I can tell you that because I remember once I did this recipe for a lasagna using our chicken tikka masala, and I know
Tikka masala.
the tikka masala, and I know how that sounds. But when you're making,
Sounds delicious.
yeah. So I would make lasagnas at home for my kids, and it takes a lot of time because you make the tomato sauce, then you make the bechamel, and the rest of it. And then I decided I want to try this because actually Indian tomatoes are really good. So Indian tomatoes are very similar to Italian tomatoes in that way. Plus the tikka masala is not heavy on spices. It's kind of a very neutral, clean, warm flavour. So I tried it and it was so delicious. I had some vegetables and I did this and I did that. And I made this lasagna in like 25 minutes. It was the easiest lasagna I ever made. So I thought it was the best thing ever. So I wrote a recipe and I posted it and everything else. And you had a lot of people up in arms saying, oh my God, what are you doing? And my Italian grandmother and da-da-da. And I totally understand the sentiment. But we had all these people who love our products saying, what are you talking about? It's great. And the Spice Tailor is great. And they really stood up for us.
It was great because you'd have someone saying, you can't do this. And you have 20 people jump on them saying, why can't you do this? Or why can't you do that, etc.
Yeah.
And we never had to say anything.
Fantastic.
We never had to say anything at all. More people positive than negative. The personal objective slowly went away.
I mean, we did things like we would recruit people to sort of sign up to the, what did we call it? The Spice Insiders. The Spice Insiders.
So influencers you're talking about?
No, not influencers, just people who, for example, if we did Taste London, would say, if you want to be a Spice Insider, sign up, and we'd get their
Get some
details.
recipes, whatever.
Okay.
And we would send them products that I was working on in advance and say, well, what do you think? What do you think? And actually, so we did develop a whole community of people who were felt involved in, and they were. If I had 50 people saying it's too spicy, I'm like, that's 50 people who are saying it's too spicy, or 50 people saying it's not spicy enough. So we did really want people to get involved and to tell us what they liked in our products and how to get it right for them. It was a nice way of involving people, but also getting really good feedback.
Piper talks about brand legends, the idea of a brand staying resolutely true to its purpose. What was Spice Tailor's purpose?
It was, and I think it remains, really all about making proper, authentic food accessible to everybody. And that kind of stayed with us. So even as we went through different range options, it was sort of, is it doing that? Is it authentic? Is it easy? Is it clean label? That was really important to us. We never did anything that wasn't clean label. Even our naans, when we did our naans, it was the only naan on the market that didn't have any preservatives because that was super important to us. And took us 9 months to get right. So that stayed through, even though we went outside of Indian food and we did sort of Thai curries and Indonesian curries. And before we sold the company, we did a whole load of stir fries, which actually launched after we sold. But again, it was sort of, if it's going to be Korean, gochujang based, it's going to be really good. And if it's going to be a stir fry, it's going to be influenced by a proper stir fry. So I think the values stayed true.
Absolutely. And that's what the entire business was built around. And so everything we did was about, okay, you're not going to change those couple of core things around the quality and around the, making it accessible, convenient to people.
Yeah.
And if you look at the range, at the beginning, if you look at the range at the end, that applied all the way through.
Mm. Yeah. And that's what made it better and different, because that's another phrase.
I think so. The first day the new FD came, I had a chat with him and I was like, now, Matt, do not tell me to value engineer the food because it's not going to happen. And I remember because he told me this later.
Explain what value engineer means.
Value engineering means when you look at the product from a cost perspective and you take the expensive ingredients out and you engineer the product to make it just better for your margins. So Adarsh and I had this informal, like, can you make it cheaper? Can you change it? And I was like, no, I can't. This is the korma is how it is, and I feel like it wouldn't be a proper korma if I didn't do that. And so when Matt came in, I said, don't talk to me about it, Matt. And
Poor Matt. I feel sorry for Matt, the FD.
It's funny because he laughed at the time and then he kind of brought the story up later and he said, you set the ground rules. And I was like, I'm not a number person. So we don't have so much to kind of get involved with, Matt, but don't come to me with this. And he was like, and it was good because actually he understood very quickly what the company's about. And it's really about the product.
Yeah, and we, within the business, the authority on the product was Anjum. So I didn't really care whether everyone came along and said, look, this product is just as good as this product and it's cheaper. And I said, look, if Anjum says it's fine, it's fine. If it's not, I don't care. And so invariably, you can't get something cheaper that tastes the same. So if you want something that tastes great, it's going to have a cost attached to it. And that's just what the cost that is going to be. And because it's all fresh ingredients and everything else, there's no economies of scale attached to it. The economies of scale come in to the carton. Can you go and get more sleeves printed at a cheaper rate and stuff like that? The negotiations with the shipping line. So the business was, it was focused on actually you're not touching the product.
Yeah.
And everyone understood that.
True. But having said that, when we talked about next range options, Matt was in there straight away saying, what is the gross margin? And let's not even go there if actually we're what they call margin decretive, right? If you're going to bring down our gross margin across the portfolio, let's not go there. And that I did listen to because obviously, he's setting new rules and we're growing as a business. And we wanted the right checks and balances in places. We wanted the right processes in places. We started out the two of us, but, this was already further down the journey. So, yes, whilst I said I'm not value engineering anything, I'm not changing any recipes. I, for example, wouldn't have done a new range which actually at the price we would sell it at to make money, no one would buy it. So I was careful about that.
And that was important again because it came into the whole conversation around working capital. You got a limited amount of money. What are you going to do with it? Yeah. There's no point, launching a new range. If you can launch one new range a year, launch a range which doesn't make any money because it's taking up working capital. It's not going to help you grow the business going forward.
So you were in the UK and also Australia, correct?
We were in the UK, we were in Australia, we were in Canada, and we started Ireland 2 years before I think we sold out.
Never on the European mainland?
No, we didn't. No, we never went to distributor. We did everything directly, and doing Europe directly, I don't even know how we would have done it with our resources.
And then Brexit came along, and that would have made it difficult.
Exactly.
So as it turned out, it was probably a good decision. Look, I want to talk to you about your new business. Now, let's move on. I've got a couple of very beautiful boxes in front of me of tea. And the brand name is 96 Degrees. So talk to me about that.
My first business ever was in tea 30 years ago. And I did it for 7 years. It was part of the family business, etc. And I left it in 2000. Along comes COVID. And during that period in between, I used to get tea sent over from India. So I still knew people in the industry. My family had been in the tea industry for many decades. My father told his involvement in it in the mid-2010s. But I'd been in the industry. I'd always get decent tea coming over to me. Along comes COVID. Supply chains are broken. And I can't get good tea. And I'm afraid I'm a tea addict. I need to have a cup of tea in the morning.
Well, we both do. So I was making fresh masala tea every morning with ginger and milk and the whole thing. And I remember when we first got married, I'd put it like a tea bag in, like a very, an everyday brand. And Adarsh was like, you can't be doing that. And
had I known that before,
when
I probably
his father came into town, it was
right.
like massive disappointments on the daughter-in-law side. So when we ran out of our black tea, we sort of walking around everywhere. And
we're trying to find decent tea, and we can't find decent tea, and anything that's drinkable is just fantastically priced.
Yeah.
And so I said, the world hasn't changed in the last 20 years. Okay. And so we sold the Spice Tailor, and I said, okay, I'm going back into tea. But again, we're starting from the same premise, which is the product. And so we spoke earlier on about, from starting to going live, it's been the same for 96 Degrees. we probably spent the first 9 months scouring the world, trying to find the right tea. And so one tea is coming from Germany, and another one's coming from Croatia, another one from Egypt, another one from Japan, another one from China. And it was just tasting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of different types of tea till we got the teas right.
And why is it called 96 degrees?
It is the optimal temperature of water to make the perfect cup of Assam tea.
So what is the timeline for this then?
We launch in Australia in about 3 weeks.
Okay.
So we thought we'd keep it close to home. So that's our first market. So we launch in Australia in about 3 weeks. We hope to launch in the UK towards the end of this year. And then we'll take it to another country, we hope, early next year.
I have to ask you, why? You have built this amazing success with Spice Tailor. You made however much money you made from it. You could have just sailed off on a yacht somewhere.
Yeah.
But no, you are going again.
I think we do it for different reasons, actually. I can speak for mine. I think I don't know what else to do. I've never not worked. But also, I genuinely feel that to have a good old age, you need to be doing something. So sometimes when I don't want to do it, I still do it because actually it's maybe painful to kind of get involved in other business, do it now. But actually, I think it's all for the good. So I do think actually I'm too young to retire anyway, so I had to do something. And I think probably retirement's not the best thing to do anyway.
When we set up the Spice Tailor, I think we probably came up with the name late 2010, early 2011. Actually, we also registered the Tea Tailor.
Oh, did you?
Because I said, I'm going back into tea. And that was 13 years ago.
Back when.
I love tea. And the world's changed. If you want to have great tea in tea bags, they've got to really be pyramid tea bags. They only were an invention in the early 2000s. So after I'd left the business, had time on my hands again. I like creating businesses. Spice Tailor wasn't my first one. 96 Degrees is my first one. And so the two match up beautifully. I'm going to create a new business and it's in tea.
I must ask you, though, when you do build, I'm always interested in talking to founders. You create this wonderful thing, a success, and I want to ask you how you define success in a moment, but it must be difficult, in a way, a sort of form of bereavement to sell this baby.
Yeah.
Move away from it.
Yeah.
Distance yourself.
It's funny because the Spice Tailor was my third child. It literally came out the same year as my second child. And I was working on as much on it as I was with my children. It's your third child. And you grow with it and it grows with you. And when we sold it, it's always hard because you're sort of handing over your child. You're like, okay, now go to university, go and fly and live without me. And you do want to be involved because you've been involved every single day. Premier were quite clear. They wanted to understand the processes. And then they sort of said, well, we've got this. Don't worry about your baby. We will take care of your baby. But I think they wanted to get really underneath it all and sort of do it themselves. So they didn't really need me. And so I very quickly was realizing actually there's no point in thinking about it because they're doing it their way. They're a really big company. They probably know what they're doing more than we were doing things still very kind of simply. And actually, I found that there was just the relief of no stress was quite good, actually. So I was all right. But I still see the Spice Tailor and what they do on social media and in the supermarkets, and it's still going to be my baby.
It still makes you proud.
It still makes me proud. But I'm not thinking about it all the time as I was when I first sold it. That happened quite quickly for me, personally.
And you had 2 weeks on the sofa and then you were off.
Yeah, the first day was phenomenal. You wake up in the morning and you have no phone calls to attend, no emails in your inbox, no meetings to go to. It's fantastic. And I just remember lying in bed. It was the 1st of October. And I remember lying in bed thinking, wow, I could do this. Day 14, I was going spare. I was like, what am I going to do today? I don't know how to fill my day. I've got to do something. I can't lie in bed all day long. And so I started writing the business plan for 96 Degrees on the 15th day. But the Spice Tailor, Anjum was the creator. It was her idea. It was her recipes, her fingerprints all over the packaging, and all the recipes were hers, etc. And so perhaps I wasn't as emotionally involved in the brand as she was. I was emotionally involved in the people running the business. And to some extent, Premier took all the team in the UK, but they didn't want to take on the team in India because they didn't have the experience of running businesses in India. And so that became something that I did. And so I carry on working with those same individuals who helped us to build the Spice Tailor, now working on the Premier account in helping them to transition. But I'm still in touch with them, so there hasn't been this sense of bereavement for me because actually my team that I've been working with for a decade plus are still there.
How do you define success?
For me, success was always about creating something better. I never really thought I never really imagined where the Spice Tailor would go.
Well, financially?
Yeah. I just wanted to be the best Indian product on the market. And it's silly, but that's really what it was. And I remember really early on when we got the board, they said, well, what do you want to achieve? And I said, I want to be the best Indian product in the market. They were, how are you defining that? I was like, oh, good question. I don't know.
There is a financial side to it, for sure.
It must feel great that you've made money, right?
Yeah, it feels great when you make money. But I think it's completing the entire journey. You come up with an idea all the way through to going through due diligence to sell a business and for other people wanting to buy it. That is the entrepreneur's dream, isn't it? I have an idea and someone else wants it and they're going to pay me money for it, leaving aside how much money it is or not. That's how you kind of define the journey. And we managed to do it.
There will be people listening to this who will be very inspired by what you achieved. What would your advice be to anyone wanting to achieve something similar?
I think that, I'm the kind who's always sort of follow your dreams, because I think if you are doing what you enjoy every day, that's just a better life journey. I think it's much tougher than you think it is. And I think as long as you have that grit and resilience to say, okay, I get it, it's going to be tough. And pivot, learn to pivot. People get stuck in our ideas and sometimes some idea is not 100% hitting right, but you're not far off the mark. So always have that flexibility to say, okay, what am I doing right? Get advice and then pivot as you need to.
Advice is really very important. Being an entrepreneur is quite a stressful, challenging, but lonely journey. And sometimes you can get stuck in your own rabbit hole trying to work out what to do, etc. We were very lucky. We had great advisors from day one, a consultant to begin with, and thereafter the NEDs on the board.
And we had each other. So
we had each other.
We had each other, which we talk to people
who are... That shared the stress.
Yeah, it shares the stress. And also you have someone to bounce ideas off.
But then externally getting someone who's got experience, who can sit there and say, okay, what you're seeing I've seen before. This is how perhaps you can deal with it. Because you don't have all the answers. And sometimes when you're stuck, up to your eyeballs in a particular problem, you need someone from outside to say, there's another way of doing this.
Also, entrepreneurs in their nature, they're very sort of optimistic. Otherwise, you'd never start a business.
God, yes.
So Adarsh is a really optimistic one, we say, in our relationship.
I'm a balanced optimist.
And I say I'm realistic. So I would be the one who's like, really? Should we be going into America right now? I mean, really? So it's nice to have that balance. So when you kind of look in hindsight, how did we manage it? It was probably a lot of that.
It's such a pleasure to meet you both. Thank you.
Likewise.
Thank you.